Today, in this final part of this series that I've called God's Bringers, if you're taking notes, you can start with this key thought. Every new move of God requires new language. Old language, old ways fall short. New moves require new language. Old language won't take us to new places. Let me illustrate this from Exodus chapter 3, the story of Moses leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. What we see in Exodus 3, before I read verse 7, here's what we see. Moses is minding his own business. He's tending to his father-in-law's herd of sheep, and God takes him on a journey, and there's a burning bush experience. God speaks to him through a burning bush. Now, the vast majority of us will not have spectacular encounters like this with God. And the reason I want you to know that is because whether your experience with God is spectacular or ordinary, your calling is still divine and strong. The more spectacular your calling doesn't necessarily mean the more spectacular your assignment. And I say that because so many times we say, well, I haven't seen this. And what I want to do today is I want to show you by the time we're through how you can see your calling clearer today than you ever have. And maybe Moses needed extra help. Needed extra help with this spectacular moment, and God wants to take you on a different kind of journey. So he gets this burning bush experience. God tells him he's going to be the liberator of people, and then we pick up the conversation, and the Lord says this to him in verse 7. And I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, heard their cry because of their taskmasters, and I know their sorrows. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to, what's that word? And to bring. He wants to bring them somewhere, bring them up from that land, the land of Egypt, what they've been used to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 10, he says this, come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people and the children of Israel out of Egypt. So God gives Moses an assignment. And I want you to notice something before we read it. What Moses does with God's assignment is begins to make excuses and objections and tell God why it won't work. I wonder if anybody in the room has ever done that with God. I wonder if anyone in the room has ever said, God, my problem is bigger than your plan. I wonder if anyone has ever thought to themselves, my problem has more power than God does. This is where Moses was. He was attached to some old thinking and some old ways, and God had to give him new language for a new thing that God wanted to do. And so watch what Moses says. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So he said, God's response to Moses is, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you. Pause. Moses asks God to validate who he is. Moses' question is, who am I up against this big assignment? Notice that God doesn't answer that question. God doesn't tell Moses who Moses is. God tells Moses, I'm going to be with you. That's all you need to know. That if God's with you, it doesn't matter who you are. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not quick enough. In and of your own self, you don't have the goods. This reminds me of a long time ago before we started this church. I've told it before, but it bears repeating that. Unbeknownst to me, I asked the same question that Moses asked when given this assignment. God, who am I that I should start a church? I couldn't have been your first choice. I'm not the most eloquent. I'm not the smartest. I don't have all the things that I need. And I said to God, there's no way that I could have been your first choice. And I don't mean to hurt a voice, but God responded back to me and he said, you weren't. That's encouraging, isn't it? Like, thank you for validating what I felt to begin with. See, I said, well, why me then? He said, you weren't my first choice, but you were the first one to say yes. That's important. God doesn't need you at your best. He needs you to get to a yes. Because as soon as you say yes, all of the power of heaven comes rushing to back you and help you in that assignment. Because when heaven is in you and on you and behind you, it changes who you are into a different person. And you're able to do things not in your own ability. Because watch, it's not by might, it's not by power, but it's by God's Spirit. That's how things get done. So he's telling Moses, quit thinking about you. You're not the subject. And here's what happens. I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, excuse number 2 coming, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, they're going to say back, what's his name? What am I supposed to say to them? And God said to Moses, every new move, this is my words, I'll get back to it. Every new move requires new language. No name for God yet. And God gives Moses this. And God said to Moses, tell them, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me. Every new move requires new language. The new language was, I am. I'm with you. I'm going to be everything you need. He says, he gives him language. If you continue reading, God tells him, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. The people leave. They're sent into freedom. They're wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. And here's why. Because it was quicker for them to get out of Egypt than it was for Egypt to get out of them. It took a long time for the residue. And they're wandering around in the wilderness and they start looking backwards to the old ways, to the old language, to the old land, to the old environment, to the old relationships, to the old stuff. And they start saying, it was better for us when we were in Egypt. When you fixate on what was, you start to believe lies. It wasn't better for them in Egypt. They didn't own anything, including themselves. They had to work from sun up to sundown with very little resources, beaten, bullied, punished for not doing it. And they're wandering in the wilderness in freedom. And they're saying it was better when they were captives. When you stay connected to the old things, when you stay connected to the old solutions, the old thoughts, the old mindsets, you start to believe lies. And here's what happens. You get stuck and you end up believing that the way it was as good as it'll ever be. And as soon as you start feeding that, you begin to act and behave in ways that cause you to crave the safety and security of your past and things that were predictable. And you stop being the pioneer, the trailblazer, the person who was the forward-thinking, innovative individual. Pharaoh, let my people go. And here's what I think is the application for us. I don't think we need that language anymore, Pharaoh, let my people go. Jesus came and set us free. So we're free. Here's the language that's going to get us unstuck. It isn't Pharaoh, let my people go. It is people, let that Pharaoh go. Let the old way go. Let the old you go. Let your old church go. Let your old faith, what used to be, let it go. Because watch this, his mercies are new every morning. There's a reason why this spiritual miracle of manna came down from heaven, because God was saying, you need to have an everyday refreshing in relationship with me. Don't get stuck on spiritual leftovers. Stay hungry and thirsty for the new things that I'm going to provide. Jesus uses an interesting picture of wine skins and wine. And in ancient times, wine was held in, it would be different types of, sometimes it would be like lining of the stomach of an animal, and they would let that dry out a little bit, and I don't know the entire process, but this is how they would store wine. And they would put the juice in it, and the juice would age and ferment, but it would grow, it would expand, and it would stretch the membrane of that organ in which it was carried in. And when it would become fully complete, that wineskin would dry out. And what people would sometimes do is they would try to put juice, new wine that was going to be made into wine, into the old container. And the old container would be dry and brittle, and that new wine, as it was becoming its next version, as it was going from grapes to wine, it would actually break the container that it was held in. And all would be lost. And Jesus is painting a picture for us. He's saying, hey, listen, when I'm doing a new thing on the inside of you, you can't put the new you into old containers. You can't put the new you in an old brain. You can't put the new you in an old mindset. You can't put the new you in an old thing. It's going to break it all. You have to change everything. You have to start from scratch. So I'm really saying this. This is kind of, I hope that you can maybe read between the lines, but I can break it down just a little bit. That this church is not trying to get back to who we were before the pandemic. This church is trying to move forward to who God has us to be next. And that's the healthiest version of us. And in your life, whoever you are to be next, you need to understand this, that every new move of God, listen carefully, write this down if you're taking notes, new moves require a new you. If you try to put the new you in an old container, you're going to break something. You're going to break a bunch of stuff. So the question then is, what creates a new you? I want to walk you through that because I told you I would. Because by the time you leave here, I want you to see this so clearly that you can take application and you can make steps. How do you do that? I think it's quite straightforward. It's simple, but it isn't easy. Here's what you do. You begin to pay attention to what you do and what you have done that you enjoy. What you do and what you've done, and evaluate those things that you did. Notice that when God finds Moses, he's not a revolutionary. He's not a leader of masses. He's struggling to lead his father-in-law's sheep. He's tending to sheep. He's doing something. So here's what I want you to do. Right now, everyone in the room and anyone watching online, get a writing implement, if you would, please. Come on, get a pen, get something to write, take out your phone, and we're going to do this together. I want you to begin to make a list of every job that you remember having had. This is going to be fun. Some of you are going to be here a long time because you've had many jobs, but just list them. Come on, seriously, do it. Let's do it together. If you aren't old enough to have had a job yet, here's what I'm going to ask of you. Think about the things that you want to do, what you dream of being. The very first thing that I ever dreamed of being, while you're writing, I'm giving you time. The very first job, anybody want to know my first dream job was? First dream job was to be a garbage man. I don't know why. I want to pick up trash. I grew out of it as I aged and started smelling dumpsters. I changed my mind rapidly, but that was one of the first things. So if you're too young to have any jobs, write down what you dreamed of doing. And as adults, let me just say something. Don't talk children out of their dreams. They may never do it. They may never realize it, but it may be pointing them in a direction that God is trying to lead them. And I'm going to show you how. So make a list of those things. I did this. And okay, so now you've made a list. So let me illustrate this to you. My very first job, I was a server at a place called the Inn at Sharonbrook. The Inn at Sharon Brook is an assisted living facility that is still in operation today. I didn't put it out of business. Come on, somebody. Like, it still goes. I was 15 and a half years old, and I was a server. A daunting task. A dining room full of older people with complex dietary needs, of which we as servers had to memorize them or pay close attention to the board. I made the determination I was gonna memorize it. And as I looked back, I thought, wow, that is quite a responsibility to give to a 15 and a half, 16-year-old to feed elderly people certain types of food and make sure they don't eat certain types of food that could make them really sick, you know? I remember people, you had to watch because there were people who had diverticulitis, so they couldn't have certain types of food. There were people who were diabetics that couldn't have any sugar. There were people who were lactose intolerant, so they couldn't have any milk products. There were people who were low, like 85% of them were on low sodium diets, but they're sold on the table. Come on, it's weird. But so I had to memorize all these things. I remember this one man, I could call his name, I know exactly where he sat in the dining room. He was diabetic, and every time I ever waited on him, I would give the dessert selections, and he would always choose the one that had sugar in it, knowing that he couldn't have it. And my heart went out to him. So I always just took his order and always brought him the sugar-free one. And sometimes it was obvious because one day the sugar-free option might be Jell-O, and the sugar option would be like chocolate cake. So like, it was clearly obvious. So I waited tables. I did that. I worked at the Olive Garden for like 3 days. It's the only job I ever walked out of. I was a busser, and I hated it. I hated it. It was the one here, and I left. I worked for a telecommunications company running cable. And then we got married and we moved to Oklahoma, and Ange and I worked at a place in Tulsa that you've heard of called Applebee's. And we both worked together for our entire first year. We were both servers. And one of us was better than the other. Oh. What's that? She says that's a strong no. It's only been 25 years and she's still in denial. Please pray for her. This part is true. Who was a better server is subjective, right? I have my opinion, she has hers. But what is not subjective is who made more money. Every time, almost every time, like 98% of the time. And she even has an excuse for that. Listen, she's not over it. The reason it even came to my mind was because she was talking about it last week with someone. She's like, yeah, he only made more money because he was a guy. And guys make more money waiting tables than girls. And I'm like, that's really sexist and rude. You know what I mean? Like, you should be ashamed of yourself. But the year after that, she got pregnant, and so Ange worked at Sam's. I had to find Sam's Club, and I had to find a restaurant that was within walking distance because we shared a car. So I worked at a place called Tony Roma's. I learned that I hated waited tables on Sundays. You want to know why? Because of church people. We're the worst. We are the absolute worst. We used to be the absolute worst. I almost got fired one day. I was waiting on a table, and I went to the table and I saw what looked like a $100 bill sticking out of the binder. And I went to it, and when I got to it, it was a gospel track. Like it was a witnessing tool. And I opened it and it said, "Are you disappointed?" I said, "Well, yes, I am." And they said, the track went on to say, "Imagine eternity without Jesus. Imagine how disappointed you'll be." I was ticked. I took that track and I followed them out to the parking lot. And I found them and I said, "Oh, what's up with this?" "Oh, we wanted you to know the good news, sir." I know the good news. I'm trying to feed my wife and family, and money would actually help. Yeah. Stop doing this because you're not making a good name for Christ followers. You're not making matters better. You're making it worse. Quit. Yeah. Stop doing this. I was like 19 or 20 years old. I almost got fired. So I figured something out, though. You know what I figured out? On Sundays, this is a long time ago, they used to allow smoking in restaurants. There was a smoking and non-smoking section, which, by the way, that's the stupidest thing ever. What is there, some kind of wall that stops the smoke from going over? It's dumb. Whatever. So there was a smoking and a non-smoking section, and on Sundays, I requested to serve in the smoking section because church people wouldn't sit in the smoking section on Sunday. And here's what I found out. The smoking section was close to the bar. And when people drink, they get generous. Right? And so I'm like, I'm sitting there, I'm gonna serve in the smoking section near the bar, and I'm gonna have a good Sunday. And I did. Didn't mean to tell you this, but I will. Learned so much that partway through my second year of Bible school, I was a bartender. I'm like, wait a minute, bartenders get $8.25 an hour plus tips, and all the servers have to tip them. I was going home with bank. One day I get a phone call. The dean of the Bible school calls, says, are you bartending? Yes, I am. We're gonna need you to not do that anymore. I'm like, that seems narrow-minded, but okay, I get it. Okay. The last job I ever had was at General Electric. I think the plant is still there now. It's called Momentive now, I believe. I'm gonna go someplace, not just being goofy. Giving you time to think, and I want to take you somewhere with this. At GE, it was a quartz plant, and quartz started with raw materials. Quartz is like almost, it's very similar to sand, very white sand, like you would see on a beach or whatever, but just very pure. And I worked in several of the departments, but one of the departments that I worked in was the fusion department. And what would happen in fusion is you would put sand into this spinning pot and bring it into the powerhouse. And in the powerhouse, there was an electric current that you would start, and it would get to like 11,000 degrees in there. And the pot's spinning, and while it's spinning and it comes in contact with the electricity, the sand turns into this, what you would think is glass. And it comes out of the powerhouse and it's spinning and it's glowing red hot. Like, I mean, it's hot. It was just sand. And by the time it cools, you pop it up, take it out of the container, and then they'd cut it and clean it and send it out. And you would have a crucible, which would be like a really, really big bowl. Like the small one would be like this big around. They had massive ones. They had to have handlers to move around and so on and so forth. And so those were my jobs. And I said all that because I wanted to illustrate this to you. That if you go back through, and I'm gonna put three things on the screen for you. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to write these things down. When you make that list, this is gonna help you create the new you, okay? Number one, I want you to ask God for his help. Number two, I want you to seek common themes. Number three, here's going to be the result. You're going to find spiritual insight. I want to show you how this works. Ask God for his help, seek common themes, and find spiritual insight. I started noticing things. Watch, every new move requires new language. I didn't have this language then, but I have it now. Here's what I realized. As a server, I seem to be gifted and seem to enjoy helping people serve them a nice meal and have a nice experience. That's exactly what I do spiritually. I serve, I prepare the best meal that I can, and I deliver it to you to the best of my ability with God's help. And I started seeing these themes in everything that I did. In the General Electric plant, this is what I realized. I started with a raw material, brought it in contact with some power, and it became this really usable product for the semiconductor industry to make computer chips because it was pure and clean. And I thought, well, I do the same thing. I take raw human beings, invite them into a powerhouse, let God fuse them together, and then try to deploy them into action so that they're fit, so that we're fit and meet for the master's use to draw out of us whatever he's put inside of us for the world around us. right? So I'm telling you that because I believe that if you ask God for his help and you start seeking common themes, you're gonna find spiritual insights about the next you, about the new you. What creates the next you is hidden in the things you've already been doing. God put it there because here's what you need to understand. God's calling on your life was there from the foundation of the world. He says this, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. And in that case, he called this individual to be a prophet. So I happened to glance over and see this brand new, beautiful miracle of a baby that's over on this side of the room. And I know his name, but we're online and they might want to tell you his name themselves, but I see him. But I remember several months ago when there was no him. And the parents and the family was wondering if he would even be here. Is that true? Like, we don't even know if this is going to work. But God knew. God knew before all of that. Before we prayed, before they stood, before they believed. But here's what I want you to see inside of that tiny little baby. Way back before he was even conceived, God planted a calling inside of him. Yeah. And it's there right now. Yeah. It's born when you're born. It lives inside of you. It's waiting to come out. And it is escaping in simple, maybe seemingly random, unidentifiable ways. But I'm showing you how it escapes. And all those jobs, you didn't just do those jobs because you did those jobs. It was your calling moving you to the new you. But see, here's the tragedy. To stay stuck in the old you, the old wineskin. To come to the place that you believe the way it used to be is the best it'll ever be. And I need someone to hear me say, no. That was just a step. And that God is always moving us toward his highest and best. You're allowed to stop whenever you want. But my language is, don't quit. Don't stop. Keep moving toward that. And when this happens, you're gonna know who you are. You're gonna stop making optional things mandatory. You're gonna grow in self-awareness, and your self-awareness is gonna cause you to divorce your ego. Some of you need to break up with your ego, and this will do it. Like, you need to divorce it. You need to come to some realizations that I'm assigned to my assignment, not anybody else's. My assignment is to empty my cup, not my job to fill yours. And all these things, here's what they do. They help you stay connected to the heart of broken humanity. Humanity's broken, and it needs you. And my job is the language that I'm using is, I don't even really know if what I do can be confused with pastoring, to be honest with you. I don't know half the times what to call it, except for I'm trying to get you from here to there. And I know here is not all there is. Here is not all there is. I'm just saying, there's next. There's life after loss. There's life after that death. There's life after that breakup. There's life after being laid off. There's life after that mistake. There's life after whatever it is that you've walked through. Watch this too. There's life after life. You've been doing good. You've been strutting along and you've been enjoying it. And you're like, hey, I'm good. No. You're good only if you keep moving. There's life after this. And as good as it's been, the faith walk says, I'm not going to stay stuck here. And I trust that as good as this has been, God has better for me there. And I'm not going to stay here. I'm looking for some people in this season of our church, I think, to do what we've always done, which is to say, you know what? there's a place called there, and that's where I want to go. Here's great, but there's better, because God is always moving us ahead.